Hi everyone, welcome back to our ongoing series of how to build a life operating system in Notion, a system that helps you facilitate, be more productive, to be more efficient, to get things done, and to manage all of the knowledge in your world, the information that's coming in and your thinking and your idea processing, how to bring that all together, have it interconnected and very streamlined. And that's what we're doing here in Notion. So today we're going to look at how to design a flowchart that maps or models the entire Notion system. So we're going to be outside of Notion this episode, but it's going to be highly relevant in terms of how we then build our system inside of Notion. So while we'll be working in a tool called Whimsical today, the whole point of this is to better implement when we get back into Notion. So a flowchart will give you a very graphical visualization of the entire system, how information, data, and assets flow from one part of the system to another, how information and data enters the system, how action and other ideas and information leave the system. It maps out the whole flow throughout the system and where the anchors are, where the assets that manage, process, store, and better enable use of data and actions within the system. And if it's helpful, I'm going to make available the actual flowchart that we're going to be looking at today, which is a flowchart of my system, the one I've been demonstrating through all these videos and will continue to demonstrate. So this will also serve as sort of a roadmap of where we're going to go after this video with future videos on this channel. It'll show the different sections coming up. So we've done 2 or 3 of the core sections, which I'll show you when we get into the flowchart. And then I'll show you where the systems around it interrelate, and those will be the systems we get into in future videos. So I'll make the publicly available Whimsical flowchart available on my templates homepage, which you get access to when you subscribe to the newsletter. Of course, you can unsubscribe at any time, so it's free even if you don't want the newsletter. Just subscribe and unsubscribe. It just triggers the automation for access to the templates. But I do hope you'll give it a chance. I work really hard to pack a lot of valuable information. The newsletter is all about the science and technology that enhances human capabilities, so it's super relevant to what we're building here in Notion. The link for that is below in the show notes. And one other piece of information, this coming Friday, I will be on Notion's office hours with Marie Poulin. Super excited to join her and talk about the system we've been talking about here on this channel. We'll be promoting the link to join that crowdcast soon. I don't have the link, but as soon as I have it, I'll put it in the show notes below. And for those of you watching this video after it's released, after this coming Friday, I will have the link to the recording below, so you'll have access to that. And we'll be looking at some key pieces of this overall system, but from a different perspective. And with that, let's dive in. So I have often recommended to clients and to people new to Notion, once you get a sense of how Notion works, lay out a flowchart. It's going to let you play with things, figuring out what you want to do with your Notion system, how the data will interact between the different assets within the system before you spend a lot of time building it. Because if you build it and you're figuring this out as you go, you're going to end up rebuilding and changing and throwing away and redoing, and it's just a less efficient way to go. If you sort of map out what you want to achieve, that helps you get there a little bit more efficiently. And a flowchart is a great way to do that. Though, just to be clear up front, you need to know what Notion can do before you can map out the flowchart. Otherwise, you won't know what to map out. So you need to get your hands dirty and just mess around with it if you're brand new to Notion. But once you see how databases work, how pages work, what is possible, the next thing is to figure out what you want to do, how you want to apply it. And that's where a flowchart comes in. So let me show you what a flowchart looks like for my system and how I've organized it. Okay, so here is the Command Center dashboard, the top level starting point dashboard in my system that we talked about earlier in the series on this channel. You can go back and look at that video if you want to see the detail on how to build this board and why you might do so. But if you recall, at the very bottom was an embedded flowchart. Now, this flowchart was created in an application called Whimsical, and Notion, fortunately, has the ability to embed Whimsical flowcharts, which is a great feature, and that's what I've done here. The alternative flowchart software to use is one called Miro, M-I-R-O, and that's a great tool as well. And Notion has an embed feature to embed blocks of Miro flowcharts also. I've used both. They're both great. Both have free plans. You can do 3 or 4 free flowcharts without getting a paid plan, so you don't need to even pay for this. Both are great. I'm a little partial to Whimsical for flowcharts. Miro has a wider range of whiteboard functionality and applications beyond flowcharts that are handy when Whimsical doesn't cover it. But I think the flowchart functionality is slightly better in Whimsical, so that's why I've migrated my flowcharts over there. But both are great, and this is a demonstration of Whimsical. So from this, if you just click Original, you can go to the original flowchart, and this is the flowchart now looking at it in Whimsical, which is software that operates within a browser window. Just go to whimsical.com. So let me just give you a sense of how this is laid out. The core functionality is in red and in the center. So a lot of the stuff we've done videos on already is in red and in the center. So this rectangle, just to give us sort of a starting point, the red rectangle is the Action Zone dashboard, what I've also referred to as the Daily Action Zone dashboard. We did a whole video on this very recently. If you haven't seen that, that video will explain this red box. This is the dashboard that I spend by far the most time in day by day. It lays out everything from every other part of the entire system that I need to do on any given day. And as I go through the day, it tells me what's next and what's next and what's next. So it manages my hours within each single day. And as each new day appears, all the new tasks for that day automatically roll in based on their due dates, the DO dates that we've talked about. So this red rectangle in the middle is the Action Zone dashboard with views of today, views of this week, this month in the action calendar, the waiting on section, and project and goal outcomes at the bottom. But it's really the today and the month action calendar that I focus on. That is red and in the center because that is the core of my interface with the system. Now, there's a big pipe going from the top up to a stack of databases. Just to give you an overview of the shapes on here and what they represent. The rectangles are dashboards. You go to the lower left key, the rectangles with different colors are dashboards for different functional areas of my life. So the Action Zone dashboard is the central one that every action from every other zone flows into. But the other zones around it, which we'll come back to, would be business, the business dashboard, content production, my media production like this video, the health and fitness dashboard, the home and family dashboard, the social dashboard for friends and group activities I do, and then the mind expansion dashboard, which we'll get into. But that's basically my vaults, the knowledge management, the knowledge that fuels all these other activities. Again, we're going to get into that in more detail. So the rectangles are dashboards for different functional areas, plus the central red dashboard of my Action Zone that has the action tasks, the action items from every other functional dashboard flowing into it. That's why it's the most important. It's the aggregate of all my tasks, of all my action items from all the other dashboard zones. Then you've got these flat cylinders. Those are Notion databases. Every cylinder in here, every cylinder you see around the sides is a database inside of Notion. So this is really laying out where we need databases and what their function will be. So notice many of these dashboards around the side circling the Action Zone board have their own databases. Even more significantly, the big pipe connecting from the top of the Action Zone dashboard, it connects to a stack of databases. This stack of databases are the core databases of the entire system. They are the central ones. We're going to go through them in just a minute. But just realize that this stack of core databases connects to a big pipe to the Daily Action Zone. Now, the stack of databases is in order from bottom to top. It has meaning and significance. The red ones are the most central ones fueling my daily actions. So starting at the bottom, this is the one database we've really looked at in detail, is the action items database, also known as a task database. The bottom of what I call the pillar to pipeline pyramid. I call it that because pillars are sort of the elite, narrow aspirations and structures of our life that are ongoing always and need to be maintained to keep the roof up on our world. But those are a few very specific items that everything supports. The bottom, we have the action items, which are many, many tasks. This is the database with the most numerous entries because it's every little thing that builds up to each level above it that supports. So it's every little item you need to do ends up in the action items task database. That's at the bottom. Directly above that is another database called projects. This week we'll be doing a video on the projects database. That is the next level up. That's the next most numerous. Now, the projects are broken down into many tasks, which is why the database under it, the task database, is bigger and a broader base on the pyramid. Then we come up to projects, but we do have a lot of projects throughout any quarter or any year. So projects is pretty broad, but not as broad as the tasks. Above that, we have the goal outcomes. These are the measurable outcomes we're working towards, and we develop projects to move us toward completion of these goal outcomes. Above that, we have another database called Vision Goals, and we're going to do a whole video or two on the relationship between vision goals and goal outcomes. So right now, just think of them all as goals, but each has a database, and you'll see why as we get into that. Then above that, we have pillars. So it's the most narrow to broader, to broader, to broader as you get to the bottom base, and you have the broadest, which is the tasks. But you have this whole alignment, a whole stack of databases that work together and flow from one to the other in this sequence. And above that, we have this diamond, which is the guiding principles. These are the values and identity elements of who you are and who you want to be. Again, we're going to get into all of this very soon when we look at the alignment dashboard. I'm thinking we'll probably do an introduction to the alignment dashboard this week as well. That's going to be a super important one. We'll also be talking about that in the Notion office hours. Parallel to that, on the side, directly to the right of it, are the cycles. Now, these are each a database as well, but they have a very different function. This is basically the review function, and the review elements loosely coordinate to various levels of the core database stack, which is the action items, projects, goal outcomes, vision goals, and pillars and guiding principles. Corresponding with those are the daily tracking, which largely correlates to the action items and tasks that you're doing every day. Then the next database up is a weekly review database. So this is basically the weekly entries in their own database, where I review the past week, what was successful and what was not successful, highlights and disappointments, and I map out what I want to happen the next week. We'll do a whole video on these reviews and how these review databases work. But essentially what happens is you have a database for each cycle. There's the daily cycle, there's the weekly cycle, the monthly cycle, the quarterly cycle, and the annual cycle. And while that sounds like a lot, I have designed it so that none of them replicate the others. So each is kept pretty manageable and small. So the act of sitting down for my weekly review or my monthly review is pretty quick, because the month is doing something different from the week, and the quarterly is doing something differently from the month. Essentially, the daily tracking, which is measuring the metrics that we've decided are important to quantify whether we're moving closer or further away from the things we want to achieve. That's not so much a review, that's just daily tracking, but it does fit within the stack because that's the daily record. The weekly records, monthly records, quarterly, and annual are reviews on those periods. Weekly is largely designed to look at projects and make sure the right tasks for the week are aligned and set up in terms of the projects that are our highest priorities right now. The monthly review is more about looking at the goal outcomes. Are the projects we're queuing up delivering on the goal outcomes? Vision goals tend to be reviewed more on a quarterly basis because those don't change that frequently. But you want to see if there are shifts in what your priorities in life are, or if certain things are getting stopped up at the vision level, you want to reassess. But you don't want to be doing that too frequently because it just takes too much time. Then pillars and guiding principles tend to be annual things you're not changing very frequently at all, but you do at the outset of each year want to have a sense of where it's going. But we're going to get into all that. I don't want to jump the horse because this video is really just about seeing how to map things out. If that was confusing, don't worry about it. We're going to go into that in great detail in dedicated videos for those functions. But I'm laying out my cycles, which are my periodic reviews based on different time intervals. And I'm laying out my core databases, which have the actions, projects, goals, and pillars, which I think of as a pyramid. All right, so those are flowing into the daily action zone, which is primarily where I interact with all this stuff day to day. I interact with these other databases like projects, goals, and pillars during the weekly reviews, monthly reviews, and quarterly reviews. But you can see how they're all linked up to the level at which they come into play in the system, particularly my activity with the system. And then the third kind of element on the flowchart is this oval with a lighter shade inside. So that's a data input. So on the outskirts of many of the databases, there is an oval with a lighter shade feeding that indicates data that needs to come into the system from outside the system. So the tasks that are being created from projects, those are being created from within the system because the projects database is part of the system. But there are some tasks that are not fueling projects or not delivering on projects. They're just to-do items that need to get done, and you're just entering those on the fly, either on your mobile phone or wherever, or in the computer, but you're entering them as one-offs. They're not dependent on this core stack of project goal databases. So I do want to map where these entries are coming into the system, because again, systems are very much about what's entering, what's moving through it, and what's exiting the system. So we've got external to-dos coming into the action item database. Over here on the right, we've got the blue ones, and I've color coordinated. So the blue is the health and fitness, the green is business, the purple is content production. So there's a coordination and organization by color as well. Red is the central stuff feeding my daily action zone. The blue over here is an interesting data input because it's fueling two databases. This is information on health and biometrics. So I've got my Oura Ring sleep data, I've got my Withings data scale capturing biometrics, and I've got my Apple Watch capturing other biometrics. And those things are feeding both my daily tracking in terms of my health elements of the daily tracking. The daily tracking also has business elements and personal and relationship elements. but a lot of the data coming in is the biometrics for my health. So that's fueling the data tracking. It's also fueling my fitness activity database. If I were managing a nutrition database, I would have that next to health and fitness as well. That'd be a second one. At other times in my life, I have done that. And if nutrition is an issue that you want to improve, I would recommend having a nutrition database and tracking that as well. So that would be attached to health and fitness. But you'd have a system, probably an app, that would be capturing your nutritional intake. And then that would be another oval feeding both the daily tracking and the fitness. In other places, we have in the business section over here, external data from my CRM and my accounting data from my accounting software, which in my case is Xero, could be QuickBooks or whatever you use, or FreshBooks. That'll be external data coming into the databases that are fueling the business dashboard. All right, so we've got the top, we've got the external data coming in. One more down on the bottom that's important, media resources. So again, this purple area on the bottom is my Mind Expansion dashboard, which is about information and content management and knowledge management. So I've got the Notion Web Clipper feeding stuff into the media resources database. I've got Evernote, which is also feeding information into my media resources database, both because I have a large legacy of information captured in Evernote. And when it becomes relevant to a project I'm actively working on, all of my activity and projects are in Notion. So I will at that point bring in old Evernote clippings and articles or information into my Notion database. I also use Evernote for sort of an endless shoebox of maybe someday might be useful. Notion I use for things that are actionable and in play right now, but things that I might use someday, I'll use Evernote and just throw it in because it's a little bit better for capture. It's also good for bubbling up and has incredible search. And I don't want to clutter up my Notion stuff with endless piles of information that I'm not using. I bring it into Notion when I'm actively engaged with it. But when I'm just throwing it into the endless pit of maybe someday I'll want to be able to access this, I tend to just dump it into Evernote, like I said, and then that becomes an import into my media resources database when it becomes relevant to something that I'm active on. So around the action database, in my case, and these are going to vary for everybody, but some of these might be universal. And I'll just give you an example of what I have surrounding my action database so you can think about what would be relevant to you in your Notion system. So first over here and to the left, I have the green, which is the business dashboard. And within that, I have an admin, business admin section. I have client operations, and I have sales and marketing. So those are fueled and powered by the two databases of the sales process database and the client database. The client database is the more important one. That's where I have all the active client engagement stuff. So I have my internal notes and preparations for work I'm doing with clients on one page, and then there's a separate page for each client that's a subpage that is the shared workspace that we both interact in, that we both create tasks in, that we put admin and billing information, we put documentation of all of our meeting notes, and in some cases actual meeting video recordings. We put the deliverables all go in there. So there's one hub that each of my clients has a link to go to access everything we're working on together. And then tandem to that, I have my own notes in preparation so that I can be prepared and able to deliver when I'm interacting with the clients. I have one of those for each client. Each client is a record in the database with its own page, and then each of those has a subpage of our shared workspace. I also have a separate database for sales process. That's just the ongoing conversations I'm having with many people about potential client relationships and potential projects we might do together. But I need to keep track of that, which ones are active, which ones I need to follow up on and check in with. So that's also very organized there. And all of that fuels, both of those databases fuel my business dashboards. The content production database, we'll be doing a video on that very soon. We'll be doing a video on all this, the business databases, the business database, the health and fitness, the content, the family, all of it. So content has a production pipeline database that feeds my content production machine dashboard, provides all the information in a calendar of everything happening in my production, of videos, of blog posts, of articles, of anything, of course material, anything that I have being created. If I'm doing a series of tweets or social media, it would all be in the content production. To the right, we have health and fitness. The That dashboard will have a fitness activity area, a diet and nutrition area, and a meditation area. So that includes both physical health and mental health. And right now, the only database I have functioning with that is an actual fitness activity measuring my workouts. But at other times and with certain clients, depending on priorities and goals, you might have a nutrition database, you might have a meditation tracking database, although I track my meditation in my daily tracking. So a lot of this, which is why these inputs are going both to daily tracking and to the fitness database, is because the daily tracking will be very heavily involved in health and fitness. Truth is, some of my business metrics are also feeding my daily tracking, as are many family dashboard elements are going to daily tracking. Then I have a dashboard for home and family. This includes family and household admin, includes spouse, kids, parents, whatever you have in your life. You want to document projects you have going on with them. You want to keep track of, your activities, your conversations, your ideas, the things you want to build as a family. Those are projects, just like your business projects, those are family projects. So you'll see in my projects database, I'll have business tags in a multi-select. I'll have family tags and life tags and health and fitness tags, just like I have these different categories. And then each of these databases are also linked to project databases as well as task databases. In addition, we have family projects and family finances. It's all under the family dashboard. Then on the lower right, we have the social dashboard, which would be friends and social interactions that I'm planning, that I'm developing and cultivating, their hobbies and interests, and their travel and experiences, not business travel, but personal travel. So that could overlap with family, or it could be more personal exploration. Again, these have external correspondence and club membership information feeding it as outside data entering the system. And then finally at the bottom, we have the Mind Expansion dashboard, which we're going to do videos on as well. But it's a little bit different than the others, which is why it's directly under as a support, holding it up. So in that, we have 3 key areas: the media database in the media dashboard, which is about articles, videos, and podcasts that are providing information that's useful for projects and tasks I'm actively engaged with. All of these elements in the database could be linked to tasks as well, so they're easily accessible and they don't get lost. They're connected to the action items that are relevant to that information. I also have a separate dashboard and database on books. It's because books I organize and sort and search for and based on different criteria than articles and videos and podcasts. So I have a different organization in that database. But also books, I do a lot more elaborate note-taking. I do much more summarization because a book is a meaningful effort and investment in time. So I want to make sure I get everything out of it that I can if I'm going to spend that much time reading a book. So I've got a lot of notes and a whole notation system. We'll do a video on that in the future. And then courses and training. I do some courses. I do some training sessions, both live and online, probably more online these days. But wherever there's an opportunity to learn from someone who I think has a lot of insight, I buy and participate in programs like that. And I have a whole database for that. So I can do all of my note-taking in that database. So it's very organized, it's very systematic, and it's very accessible. And then we're going to do a video on this in the future as well, but there's a special database called the Active Workspace Database, or the In-Action Workspace. So this is kind of a creative studio where I take all of the information from these other areas and I organize this particular database by theme, by idea or theme. So there's certain actions that I'm taking that need to, a theme might be sales and marketing, a theme might be growth hacking, a theme might be product development of a particular product. So one of them is the pillars, pipelines, and vaults concept that I'm fleshing out more fully so that I can explain it and share it with people more easily. So in that, I'll be drawing from media articles, videos, podcasts, books, training, conversations I have with people, thoughts I have. So I've got an aggregated workspace on that theme or topic that's drawing from all the other databases and all my thinking and all my effort and all my research. So that's not based on the media format, the way that books or courses or articles are, but that's drawing on my aggregated thinking across all these different types of information and interactions with people and building a knowledge base around that specific theme or concept. So I have a whole database that's just about active workspaces on ideas I'm developing or subject areas I want to become more capable in or build more expertise in. Again, it could be sales and marketing. It could be family communication. It could be a lot of things. We're going to do a whole video on that, but that's an area where I'm aggregating knowledge from the different other sources based on theme, rather than in the other cases, the entries are based on the article or the book or the course. This one's based on the topic. So it will pull information from articles and courses and books and conversations. So that's really the most important one. That's where my ideas are developed. And they could be at any stage of development, but as they progress, that area gets more complete and more organized. And then from that, I will write articles and create videos, perhaps ultimately write books. I'll be creating courses. So that is basically the knowledge base for application of knowledge, not the aggregation and storage of knowledge resources or informational resources. This is using the stored and saved resources to put my ideas together in an organized way so that I can use them. Okay, so that's pretty much it. You'll see one other organizational element is this line in the middle here. The top half is core database structure, because we've got the core databases at the top. There's some databases at the bottom, but those are more specialized. Those are specialty databases supporting specific dashboards. The ones at the top support everything. So projects, action items, goal outcomes will be a part of every single other database down here. So they will all have relations linked to these core databases. And all of that, therefore, will fuel and flow into the Action Zone dashboard. So all of the databases and dashboards surrounding the Daily Action Zone will funnel into the Daily Action Zone with what needs to get done for all of them. In the Daily Action Zone dashboard and the Action Items Task Database, I will prioritize and determine all those competing things for my time, which I focus on any given day at any given hour. So it all flows. You'll see all these bilateral arrows from all these dashboards and databases to the central one, the Action Zone dashboard. That's why it's so important. But the other really important dashboard we're going to have a video on later this week is the alignment dashboard, which basically takes this core stack of action databases, the action items, the projects, the goals, the pillars, and the principles, and the cycles of the annual review, quarterly review, monthly, weekly, daily tracking. It takes all of these, puts them in the hierarchy in order, and lets you see the interconnectivity of all of them. So it keeps all of them aligned. So your tasks are aligned with your projects, which are aligned with your goal outcomes, which are aligned with your vision goals, which are aligned with your pillars and principles. And all of that is maintained by these cycle reviews, which again are kept manageable by not having any duplication across them. So each one's relatively short. You're just doing various types of reviews on a fairly consistent basis. None of them take more than a half hour. So that's pretty much it. And then all of this flows to the right here, and as I've depicted it, into these outcomes. This is what comes out of the system. System outputs are my actions. The things I do is coming out of the system that's funneling my focus. And my creative work is an output from the system. These videos, the courses I do, the lectures, the speaking engagements, the books I intend to write, all these things are outputs of the system. That's my creative work. So my actions come out of the system, my creative work comes out of the system, and my personal and business growth comes out of the system. So I'm growing and evolving. I'm becoming smarter. I'm becoming more capable of implementing. I'm getting closer to my goals. My business is making more money. My business is doing a broader range of activities and interacting with more and more people and having more of an impact on people's lives. All of that is contained within this yellow star that indicates the outputs from the system. So when you build a flowchart to map a system, you want to look at what's flowing into the system and what's flowing out of the system. And then, of course, what's moving within the system. You also want to look for where the bottlenecks might be. Where are things going to get stopped up? And if they do get stopped up, where do they pile up? And then how do you come back to it and release that pressure from the pileups? That's all stuff you need to think about. So that's all systems thinking, like I addressed in my second and third video in the series. And this is a visual depiction of all that. So I hope this is helpful. I find it really valuable because I'm a very visual graphic person. So laying it out visually like that helps me understand it on a more intuitive level. It also helps me communicate it when I'm working with clients and trying to help them understand their systems. A lot of times someone has a process for doing things, but they don't even know what the process is. So this forces you or forces a client or someone you're working with to explicitly express it in a way that they may realize, or you may realize, even though you were doing these steps, you didn't realize what the steps were. This becomes massively valuable when training new people who you have to work with, when you're bringing in new employees, when passing off an activity you used to do that you want to save time and not have to do anymore, you want to outsource it. This will help communicate to others very precisely how to do it properly. And it'll help you see the redundancy and the waste in your own processes and systems. So massively valuable. I not only recommend mapping your own system as I demonstrated here, but mapping out all of your processes that are significant for your business or the various practices in your life. You'll become better at them when you understand them, and you'll be able to streamline and make them much more efficient and much more effective. So after starting with a system overview a month or so ago, this series of Notion videos is diving into each part of a comprehensive life operating system. If this is of interest to you, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon to get updates on future videos. Leave thoughts or questions below and hit like if you found this valuable. I also write a newsletter called Mind and Machine on increasing human capability. I give away several of my best Notion templates, including this flowchart, to anyone who subscribes to the newsletter. You can, of course, unsubscribe at any time, but I hope you'll give it a chance. I work very hard to pack it with a lot of valuable insight. The newsletter link is also below in the show notes. Thanks for watching. Lots more to come.